The shuttle descended through clouds that burned orange and red like fire in the sky. And Ambassador Lyriel Vostanai pressed her 4 hands against the viewport as the planet below revealed itself for the first time. Kethros V was beautiful in a way that made her heart beat faster with fear rather than wonder. And she understood immediately why the Galactic Concord had quarantined this world for 3,000 years. Mountains rose from the surface like broken teeth, and forests of black trees stretched across continents like spreading wounds. And oceans of liquid that was not quite water churned beneath skies that crackled with constant lightning. "Ambassador," said Korthus, her lead scientist, his Vrelian tentacles curling with obvious nervousness. "I am detecting life signs across the entire northern continent." "That is expected," Lyriel replied, though her voice wavered slightly. "This is a survey mission after all." "You misunderstand me," Korthus said, and his 3 eyes blinked rapidly in the way his species did when they were terrified. "I am detecting life signs that are individually larger than our shuttle." The cabin fell silent at those words, and Lyriel felt the weight of every gaze upon her luminescent blue skin. She was the leader of this expedition, chosen by the Concord to assess whether the ancient quarantine could finally be lifted, and she had assembled the finest scientific minds from 12 different species to assist her. There was Korthus, the Vrelian biologist, with his vast knowledge of xenofauna. And there was Thesic, the Cortaxian engineer, whose people had built the greatest starships in the galaxy. And there were the twin Meridian botanists, whose names she could never quite pronounce correctly. And then there was the human doctor Marcus Cole, sat in the corner of the cabin, reading something on a datapad with an expression of mild interest, as if they were not descending onto one of the most dangerous planets ever discovered. Lyriel had protested his inclusion on the team when the Concord had first suggested it, because humans were new to galactic civilization and their capabilities were largely unknown, and because she did not understand why a species that had only achieved faster than light travel 40 years ago would have anything to offer a mission of this importance. But the Concord had insisted, and so Marcus Cole had joined them. And Lyriel had spent the 3-week journey to Kethros V, trying to understand what made him different from the other humans she had met at. Diplomatic functions. He was tall for his species, but not unusually so. And his body appeared soft compared to the armored forms of the Cortaxians or the muscular bulk of the Vrelians. And his single pair of eyes seemed limited and almost pitiful when compared to the sensory arrays of more advanced species. Yet there was something about the way he moved that made her uncomfortable. Something in the casual confidence of his posture that did not match his fragile appearance. "Dr. Cole," she had asked him during the journey, "what exactly is your role on this mission?" He had looked up from his meal with a smile that showed his flat omnivore teeth and said, "I'm here to observe, Ambassador, and to help if I can." "Help with what specifically?" "Whatever needs helping with," he had replied. And that smile had remained on his face, but something in his eyes had shifted. Something that made Lyriel feel like prey for just a moment before the sensation passed. She had not asked him any more questions after that. The shuttle touched down on a plateau overlooking a vast boneyard, and as the team disembarked in their environmental suits, Lyriel felt the weight of the planet pressing against her. The gravity was stronger here than galactic standard, nearly 1.5 times what she was accustomed to, and she saw her colleagues struggling to adjust their movements to compensate. Marcus Cole stepped out of the shuttle without any apparent difficulty and took a deep breath of the filtered air coming through his helmet. "Feels like home," he said to no one in particular. "Earth has gravity like this?" Thesic asked, his mechanical voice synthesizer crackling with static in the planet's electromagnetic interference. "Close enough," Marcus replied, and he walked toward the edge of the plateau to look down at the bones below. Lyriel followed him, her 4 legs adjusting to the uneven terrain. And what she saw made her gasp. The bones were enormous, each one larger than the shuttle that had brought them here. And they were scattered across the valley floor like the remnants of some ancient war between giants. Skulls with jaws that could swallow a transport ship lay half buried in the black soil, and rib cages rose like the frameworks of collapsed buildings, and limbs thicker than ancient trees pointed toward the burning sky. "Gorthax," Korthus said, his voice barely a whisper as he consulted his scanner. "These are Gorthax remains." "That is impossible," Lyriel said. "The Gorthax were supposed to have died out centuries ago." "These bones are not centuries old," Korthus replied. And his tentacles had gone completely still in the way they did when he was processing something his mind did not want to accept. "Ambassador, these bones are weeks old at most, and the marks upon them suggest that something has been feeding on them. What could possibly feed on a Gorthax?" Thesic demanded. "They were the apex predators of this world. The reason the quarantine was established in the first place." Marcus Cole had not moved from his position at the edge of the plateau, and Lyriel saw that he was studying the bones with an intensity that seemed out of place for a simple observer. "Dr. Cole," she called out, "what do you see?" He turned to look at her, and that strange something was back in his eyes. That predatory awareness that made her feel small and vulnerable, despite being twice his height. "I see marks on these bones that were not made by teeth or claws," he said. "I see bones that have been cracked open from the inside, as if something wanted to get at the marrow. And I see a pattern to the destruction that suggests intelligence rather than instinct." He paused and looked back at the boneyard. Whatever killed these creatures was not just hungry. "Ambassador, it was efficient, and it was careful, and it left nothing to waste." "What are you saying?" Lyriel asked. Though she feared she already knew the answer, Marcus Cole looked up at the sky where the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and his expression shifted into something that might have been anticipation, or might have been something darker. "I am saying that the Gorthax were not the apex predators of this world," he said. "I am saying that something else was hunting them, and I am saying that when the sun goes down, we are going to find out what it is." The temperature dropped as the sun touched the horizon, and Lyriel Vasthenai felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night was coming to Kethru 7. A night on this world lasted for 87 standard hours. She ordered her team to prepare the habitat, and she tried not to notice that Marcus Cole had positioned himself between them and the boneyard, watching the shadows grow longer with an expression that was almost eager. The habitat hummed with emergency power as the last light of the sun vanished below the horizon, and Lyriel watched the darkness swallow the world outside, like a living thing consuming its prey. She had studied the briefing files during their journey, had memorized the statistics and the warnings and the recommendations of 1,000 scientists who had analyzed Kethru 7 from the safety of orbital stations. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of a night that would last nearly 4 standard days. The darkness was not simply an absence of light, but something thicker and heavier. Something that pressed against the reinforced viewports of the habitat as if it wanted to get inside, sealing all external ports. Thesic announced from the engineering station, his mechanical fingers dancing across the control panels. "Activating perimeter sensors and defensive shields." "How long will the shields hold if something attacks us?" Lyriel asked. Thesic paused before answering, and that pause told her everything she needed to know. "The shields are rated for standard predatory encounters," he said carefully. "They were not designed for whatever killed those Gorthax." Korthus was hunched over the biological analysis station, his tentacles wrapped tightly around himself in a gesture of self-comfort that Lyriel had never seen him display before. "Ambassador," he said, "I have been reviewing the historical records of Kethru 7, and I have found something that was not included in our mission briefing." "Show me," Lyriel commanded, and she moved to stand beside him as holographic displays flickered to life around them. The images were old and corrupted, recovered from expeditions that had come to this world centuries before the quarantine was established. And what they showed made Lyriel's blood run cold. The Gorthaks were never the apex predators of this planet, Korthus said, his voice trembling. They were prey, Ambassador. And the creatures that hunted them were called the Volkyreth. The holographic display showed only fragments. Glimpses of something massive moving through darkness, eyes that glowed with bioluminescent hunger, limbs that ended in blades rather than claws. The Concord sent 3 colonization attempts to this world before the quarantine. Korthus continued. Each attempt was destroyed within weeks of landfall, and the only records we have are final transmissions from dying colonists. He activated an audio file, and the habitat filled with screaming and static and a sound that Lyriel could not identify at first until she realized it was laughter. Deep and rumbling and utterly inhuman. "It is playing with us," a voice screamed through the static. "Our weapons do nothing. Our shields do nothing. It is tearing through the hull like it is made of paper, and it is laughing. It is laughing at us. It is." The transmission ended abruptly, and silence filled the habitat. The Volkyreth were supposed to be extinct, Lyriel said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a desperate hope rather than a statement of fact. No bodies were ever recovered. Korthus replied. No specimens were ever captured. We simply stopped detecting them 800 years ago and assumed they had died out. But the bones outside, Lyriel began, prove that something is still hunting on this world, Korthus finished. Something large enough and powerful enough to kill and eat creatures that our records describe as functionally invulnerable to conventional weapons. The lights in the habitat flickered, and everyone froze. "Thesic," Lyriel said slowly. "What was that?" The Cortexian engineer was staring at his control panels with an expression that his species only displayed when faced with impossible data. "The perimeter sensors have gone offline," he said. "Not destroyed, Ambassador, but offline. As if something is consuming the electromagnetic signals they produce. That is not possible," one of the Meridian twins said. "Nothing organic can absorb electromagnetic radiation in that manner. The Volkyreth can," Marcus Cole said from his position by the viewport. And everyone turned to look at the human who had been so quiet they had almost forgotten he was there. He was standing with his face close to the reinforced glass, peering out into the darkness that was now absolute and impenetrable. "How do you know that?" Lyriel demanded. "Because I can feel it," Marcus replied without turning around. "There is something out there watching us, something old and hungry and very, very patient. Humans cannot sense electromagnetic fields," Thesic protested. "No," Marcus agreed. "But we can sense when we are being hunted. It is something our ancestors learned on a world that wanted us dead from the moment we evolved. And right now every instinct I have is telling me that we are prey." The habitat shook, and Lyriel heard something massive moving outside. Something that made the ground tremble with each step. Through the viewport, she saw lights beginning to appear in the darkness. Pairs of glowing orbs that blinked open one after another until there were dozens of them, hundreds of them, surrounding the habitat in a ring of hungry attention. "Those are eyes," Korthus whispered. "Ambassador, those are eyes." The eyes began to move, circling the habitat slowly, and Lyriel realized that they were not multiple creatures, but one creature. One impossibly vast creature whose body stretched across the darkness like a mountain that had learned to walk. A sound filled the air, deep and resonant and terrifying, and Lyriel recognized it from the ancient recording. The Volkyreth was laughing. "Everyone stay calm," Lyriel said, though her own voice was shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "The shields will hold. The shields will." The shields failed. The lights inside the habitat died, and for a moment there was nothing but darkness and the sound of that terrible laughter. Growing closer, emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light, And Lyriel saw Marcus Cole walking toward the airlock with steady, deliberate steps. "Dr. Cole," she called out. "What are you doing?" He stopped and turned to look at her. And in the red emergency, lighting his eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire that she had never seen in any human before. "I'm going outside," he said simply. "That is suicide," Vesic shouted. "That creature destroyed 3 colony ships. It has been hunting on this world for millions of years. You cannot possibly—" "I am not asking for permission," Marcus interrupted, and his voice had changed, becoming deeper and harder, and filled with something that made Lyriel's instincts scream at her to run. He reached down and drew a blade from his belt. A simple steel knife that looked laughably primitive compared to the plasma weapons and energy shields that her team had brought. "Ambassador," he said, "I need you to keep everyone inside this habitat. I need you to seal the airlock behind me. And I need you to not open it again until either I return or the sun rises. You cannot fight that thing." Lyriel protested. "You are just one human with a knife." Marcus Cole smiled. And it was not the pleasant diplomatic smile he had worn during their journey. It was something older and darker and far more dangerous. "Ambassador," he said, "I was not brought on this mission to observe. I was brought on this mission because the Concord knows exactly what humans are, and what we are capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized." He turned and walked into the airlock. And the last thing Lyriel saw before the door sealed behind him was the reflection of those hundreds of eyes in the darkness, and she saw that he was still smiling. The airlock cycled open, and Marcus Cole stepped out into the darkness of Kethra 7 with nothing but a steel knife and 60 million years of evolutionary warfare encoded into every cell of his body. Lyriel pressed her 4 hands against the viewport and screamed for him to come back. But he either could not hear her or chose not to listen. And she watched helplessly as the single fragile human walked toward the ring of glowing eyes that surrounded their habitat. Behind her, the rest of the team had collapsed into various states of panic, with Corthus curled into a ball of trembling tentacles and Vesic frantically trying to restore power to systems that had been completely drained, and the Meridian twins holding each other while reciting prayers to gods that seemed very far away. But Lyriel could not look away from the viewport, could not tear her gaze from the impossible scene unfolding before her. Marcus had stopped walking about 50 meters from the habitat, standing alone on the black rock of the plateau, with the wind from the approaching storm whipping at his environmental suit. And he was waiting. The eyes in the darkness shifted. Hundreds of bioluminescent orbs focusing on this tiny creature that had dared to leave the safety of its shelter. And Lyriel heard that terrible laughter again, closer now. So close that the viewport vibrated with each rumbling note, and then the Valkyreth emerged from the darkness. And Lyriel understood why the Galactic Concord had quarantined this world for 3,000 years. It was wrong in ways that her mind struggled to process. A fusion of forms that should not exist together. With a body like an arachnid merged with something reptilian, merged with something else that had no name in any language. She knew 12 legs supported its massive frame, each one ending in a curved blade of chitin that looked sharp enough to slice through starship armor. And its central body was covered in overlapping plates that gleamed like black metal in the faint light of its own eyes. But it was the head that made Lyriel feel like her sanity was cracking. A head that seemed too large even for that enormous body, with a maw that opened to reveal ring after ring of rotating teeth and sensory tendrils that tasted the air like 1,000 hungry tongues. The creature was easily 30 meters tall and perhaps 100 meters long. And as it moved closer to Marcus, its legs left gouges in the rock as if the stone itself was nothing more than soft clay. And Marcus Cole stood before it without moving, without flinching, without showing any sign of the terror that Lyriel knew she would have felt in his place. The Valkyreth stopped. And those hundreds of eyes narrowed as they studied this strange small creature that did not run and did not scream and did not beg for mercy. It spoke. And the sound was not words, but something older and more primal. A vibration that carried meaning directly into the brain. And Lyriel understood it even though she wished she did not. Little thing, the Valkyreth said. You are not afraid. No, Marcus replied. And his voice was calm and steady and carried across the plateau like it belonged there. I am not. Everything fears me, the creature said, and there was confusion in its tone now. A break in the absolute confidence that had defined its existence for millions of years. Everything that walks or crawls or flies on this world knows that I am death itself. And yet you stand before me as if you have the right to exist. I do have the right to exist, Marcus said. My species earned that right on a world that tried to kill us every single day for 200,000 years. And we did not survive by running from things that wanted to eat us. What did you survive by doing? The Valkyreth asked. And its maw opened wider in what might have been amusement or might have been hunger. By killing them first, Marcus replied. And he dropped into a stance that Lyriel did not recognize. Something low and balanced and somehow terrifying, despite how small he looked compared to the monster before him. The Valkyreth laughed again. And this time, the sound was so loud that it cracked the viewport of the habitat and sent Lyriel stumbling backward. You are amusing, it said. I will enjoy consuming you slowly. I will keep you alive as long as possible so that I can taste your suffering. And when I am done with you, I will eat the others one by one while you watch. You can try, Marcus said. And then he did something that Lyriel would remember for the rest of a very long life. He removed his environmental suit piece by piece. He stripped away the protective layers until he stood bare-skinned in the toxic atmosphere of Kethros 7, wearing nothing but simple cloth coverings and holding his steel knife in one hand. The Valkyreth's eyes widened, and Lyriel heard something in its voice that she never would have expected to hear from the galaxy's most perfect predator. Uncertainty. What are you doing? It demanded. This air is poison. This cold will freeze your blood. You cannot survive without your shell. I can survive long enough, Marcus said. And his smile had become something that made Lyriel's heart pound with a fear that was different from her fear of the Valkyreth. I am not here to survive. I am here to show you something. Show me what? What humans are, Marcus replied. And then he moved. Lyriel's eyes could not track what happened next, could not process the speed with which that small fragile human crossed the distance between himself and the nightmare creature that had ruled this world since before her species had learned to use tools. One moment he was standing still, and the next moment he was beneath the Valkyreth, moving between those massive bladed legs like a ghost made of violence and purpose. The creature screamed, and it was not a scream of anger but a scream of shock, because something had happened that had never happened before in all its millions of years of existence. Something had hurted. Marcus emerged from beneath the Valkyreth with ichor dripping from his hands, and Lyriel saw that he had torn away something important, some vital piece of the creature's underbelly that was now steaming on the black rock. That is not possible, Desik whispered from somewhere behind her, his mechanical voice filled with something that might have been awe. Human musculature cannot generate that kind of force. Human bones cannot withstand that kind of impact. This is not possible, but it was happening. And Lyriel watched as Marcus Cole began to systematically destroy a creature that had been classified as unkillable by every scientific authority in the galaxy. He moved like nothing she had ever seen, faster than his small body should have allowed, stronger than his soft flesh should have permitted. And everywhere he went, pieces of the Valkyreth came away in his hands. The creature fought back with all the fury of a predator that had never known defeat. its scythe legs slashing, and its maw snapping, and its body thrashing with enough force to crack the plateau beneath them. But it could not hit him, could not catch him, could not do anything except scream as this impossible human tore it apart piece by piece. And through it all, Marcus Cole did not stop smiling. Lyriel stood frozen at the viewport, with her 4 arms hanging limp at her sides, and her luminescent skin flickering with colors that had no name in her language. Colors that her species only produced when their minds were trying to process something that should not exist. She could not move, and she could not speak, and she could not look away from the scene of the impossible violence unfolding before her. The Valkyrath was screaming now, a sound that tore through the thin atmosphere and echoed off the distant mountains. A sound that carried 60 million years of predatory supremacy being ripped away along with chunks of its supposedly impenetrable armor. 3 of its 12 legs lay scattered across the plateau, torn free at the joints by hands that should not have been strong enough to crush aluminum foil, let alone chitin that was rated to withstand direct hits from starship-mounted plasma cannons. Ichor sprayed across the black rock in great steaming arcs, purple and thick and filled with compounds that Corthus would later identify as being more complex than anything his species had ever synthesized. And the smell of it reached even through the damaged viewport to fill the habitat with a scent like burning copper and rotting flowers. Marcus Cole stood in the center of that carnage, his bare skin covered in the blood of a god, his simple steel knife still clutched in one hand though he had barely used it, his breath coming in great clouds of vapor that crystallized instantly in the freezing air. He should have been dead 10 times over by now, from the cold or the toxic atmosphere or the crushing blows that the Valkyrath had landed on his seemingly fragile body. But he was not dead. He was not even slowing down. "Ambassador," Desic said from somewhere far away, his voice reaching Lyriel as if through deep water. "Ambassador, I am recording everything, but I do not understand what I am seeing. Human physiology does not permit this level of performance." Lyriel could not respond because she was watching Marcus tear another leg from the Valkyrath's body, watching him grip the joint where chitin met chitin and pull with a strength that made the muscles in his arms stand out like cables beneath his skin. The creature tried to crush him with its remaining limbs, tried to catch him in its rotating jaws, tried to slam its massive body down on top of him like a living avalanche. But Marcus was never where the attacks landed. Always moving, always finding the next weakness. Always one step ahead of a predator that had never needed to develop complex combat strategies because nothing had ever survived long enough to fight back. "How?" Corthus whispered. And Lyriel realized he was standing beside her now, his tentacles wrapped so tightly around his own body that they were leaving marks. How is he doing this? How is any of this possible? Adrenaline, Lyriel heard herself say, remembering something she had read in the classified files about human biology. Humans have a chemical response to danger that allows them to temporarily exceed their normal physical limits. It is called the fight or flight response. But this goes beyond any documented instance of human adrenaline response, Corthus protested. This is not a small increase in strength and speed. This is a complete transformation into something else entirely. The Valkyrath seemed to reach the same conclusion, because it stopped attacking and instead began to retreat, dragging its wounded body backward with its remaining legs while its hundreds of eyes focused on Marcus with an emotion that Lyriel never would have believed she would see in the galaxy's most perfect killer. Fear them, feared. Valkyrath was afraid. "What are you?" it demanded. And its voice was no longer filled with amusement or hunger, but with something close to desperation. "You are not like the others. You are not like anything I have ever consumed. What manner of creature wears such a weak shell and yet contains such violence within?" Marcus followed the retreating monster with steady steps, And Lyriel saw that his smile had faded now, replaced by an expression of cold focus that was somehow more terrifying than any display of aggression. "I told you what I am," he said, and his voice carried across the plateau with perfect clarity despite the howling wind and the creatures' pain, screaming. "I am human, and humans are what happens when a species refuses to die no matter how hard the universe tries to kill them." He moved again, faster than Lyriel's eyes could track, and suddenly he was on top of the Valkyrath, climbing its armored body like it was nothing more than a cliff face. Finding handholds in the gaps between its chitin plates, the creature thrashed and rolled, trying to dislodge him, but Marcus held on with fingers that dug into flesh that should have been harder than steel. And he kept climbing until he reached the massive head with its hundreds of terrified eyes. "For 60 million years you have been the thing that everything else fears," Marcus said, and he raised his knife for the first time since the battle had begun. "For 60 million years you have never known what it feels like to be prey." He drove the blade into the Valkyrath's primary sensory cluster, and the creature's scream became something beyond sound, something that Lyriel felt in her bones and her hearts and the deepest parts of her mind. "Now you know," Marcus said, and he began to cut. Lyriel watched as the human who had seemed so fragile and so unremarkable during their journey systematically destroyed the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. He did not do it quickly, and he did not do it cleanly, but he did it thoroughly, cutting away sensory organs and armor plates and anything else that might allow the fragile Valkyrath to fight back or escape, the creature begged. And Lyriel understood every word of its pleas, understood when it offered Marcus power and territory and anything else it could think of if he would just stop. Marcus did not stop. He kept working with the methodical precision of a surgeon and the relentless determination of something that had evolved on a world where mercy was a luxury that got you killed. And through it all, Lyriel stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away, unable to process what she was witnessing, because she understood now. Understood what the Galactic Concord had known when they insisted that a human be included on this mission. Understood why her species, and all the other species of the galaxy, had been so careful in their dealings with humanity. Humans were not the fragile mid-tier predators that they appeared to be. They were something else entirely, something that had learned to hide its true nature behind soft skin and friendly smiles, something that only revealed itself when there was no other choice, and what they revealed was terrible beyond anything Lyriel had ever imagined. The Valkyrath stopped moving, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Lyriel had ever heard. The sun rose over Kethru 787 hours after it had set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold that seemed almost peaceful compared to the horror of the endless night. Lyriel found Marcus Cole sitting on a boulder at the edge of the plateau, looking out over the boneyard where the remains of countless Gorthaks lay scattered like monuments to a predator that no longer existed. The Valkyrath's body stretched across the black rock behind him, torn apart so completely that it took Lyriel several minutes to understand that she was looking at a single creature rather than a collection of separate pieces. She approached him slowly, her forelegs carrying her across terrain that was now stained purple with ichor, and she noticed details that she had not been able to see during the darkness. Marcus Cole was covered in wounds, deep cuts and terrible bruises that marked every visible inch of his skin, and his breathing was shallow and labored in a way that suggested injuries she could not see. But he was alive, impossibly and undeniably alive. And he turned to look at her with eyes that had returned to the mild, friendly expression she remembered from their journey. "Good morning, Ambassador," he said, and his voice was hoarse but steady. "I apologize for any distress I may have caused you and your team." Lyriel did not know how to respond to that, did not know how to process the casual politeness from someone who had just singled handedly destroyed a creature that had ruled this world for longer than her species had existed. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment, looking at the scattered remains of the Valkyreth and trying to find words that could express even a fraction of what she was feeling. How? She finally managed to say, "How did you do that?" Marcus was quiet for a while before answering, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you know what a death world is?" Ambassador. A planet with environmental conditions hostile to the development of intelligent life, Lyriel recited. Worlds with extreme gravity or temperature fluctuations, or toxic atmospheres, or dangerous fauna. Worlds where survival is uncertain at best. Earth is a death world, Marcus said. And he smiled, but there was no humor in it. Our gravity is high by galactic standards. Our temperature varies by over 100 degrees, depending on where you are and what time of year it is. Our atmosphere contains a highly reactive gas that would poison most species. And our planet is covered with predators that have been trying to kill you since we climbed down from the trees. He paused and looked at his hands. Hands that had torn through armor that was supposed to be invulnerable. We did not become the dominant species on Earth because we were stronger or faster or tougher than everything else. He continued. We became dominant because we refused to accept that anything had the right to kill us. And we kept fighting back until everything that tried learned to fear us instead. But what you did was not simply fighting, Lyriel said. What you did was beyond anything I have ever seen from any species in the galaxy. Humans have limits, Marcus agreed. Our muscles can only generate so much force. Our bones can only withstand so much impact. Our bodies can only endure so much damage before they break. He looked at her with those mild, friendly eyes that now seemed like a mask covering something vast and terrible. But our minds can override those limits when survival is at stake, he said. We have a response called hysterical strength that allows us to temporarily ignore the safeguards our brains put in place to protect us from ourselves. It lets us lift vehicles off of trapped children or fight off predators that should be able to kill us easily or tear apart alien monsters that have never faced anything like us before. At what cost? Lyriel asked. Because she could see the price written across his body in blood and bruises. The cost is high, Marcus admitted. I will spend months recovering from what I did last night, and some of the damage may never fully heal. But I am alive, and you are alive, and your team is alive. And the thing that wanted to kill all of us is not. He stood slowly, wincing with pain that he did not try to hide. And he looked at the rising sun with an expression that might have been satisfaction, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been something else entirely. The Galactic Concord will want a report, he said. They will want to know what happened here, and what it means for the quarantine of this world. What should I tell them? Lyriel asked. Marcus turned to face her fully, and for a moment that mask slipped and she saw what was underneath. Saw the predator that lived inside every human being waiting for the moment when it would be needed. Tell them the truth, he said. Tell them that the Valkyreth were not the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Tell them that the quarantine can be lifted because the apex predator of Ketherus 7 is dead. And tell them that humanity is not the harmless newcomers we pretend to be. What are you then? Lyriel asked. If not harmless newcomers, Marcus smiled. And this time, the expression reached his eyes, even though what she saw there was not comforting. We are the monsters that other monsters learn to fear, he said. We are what happens when a species is forged in fire and blood and suffering for 200,000 years. We are the thing that the darkness does not want to meet. He began walking toward the habitat, where the rest of the team was waiting, and he paused to look back at her one last time. But we are also the species that chooses not to be monsters most of the time, he added. We are the species that builds art and music and medicine and love. And we are the species that will stand between our friends and anything that threatens them. Why? Lyriel asked. Why would you choose to hide what you are? Because what we are is terrifying, Marcus replied simply. And we do not want to be terrifying. We want to be kind. We want to be gentle. We want to be the sort of species that others are happy to share a galaxy with. He looked at the remains of the Valkyreth scattered across the plateau. But when kindness fails, and gentleness is not enough, and the darkness comes for the people we care about, he said, then we let out what we really are, and we do not stop until the threat is ended. 3 months later, the Galactic Concord quietly revised humanity's species classification, removing them from the category of mid-tier persistent predators, and placing them in a new category that had never existed before. The classification. Simply read, do not engage, and it came with a recommendation that all member species treat humans with courtesy and respect, and under no circumstances attempt to threaten them or anyone under their protection. Ambassador Lyriel Vostenai kept a copy of the recording she had made that night. The recording of Marcus Cole standing alone against something that should have been unkillable. She showed it to every diplomat who questioned why humans should be given a permanent seat on the Concord's ruling council, and she showed it to every military leader who suggested that humanity's small fleet and limited territory made them an easy target for expansion. None of them questioned her recommendations after seeing that recording, and none of them ever asked her what humans really were, because the answer was written in the ichor-stained rocks of Kethra 7. Humans were the thing that apex predators had nightmares about, and the galaxy was very lucky that they had chosen to be friends.